April 8, 1943, 27,000 FT above Caen, France. The oxygen. The altitude is a brittle, freezing void. In the crystal air, at 27,000 feet, above the occupied heart of Europe, the German pilots of Juggernaut 26 felt the familiar comfort of superiority. They were the veterans, the masters of the sky. From their sleek Focke-Wulf 190s, they watched the new American formation climbing laboriously towards them. Massive, almost comical silhouettes struggling against gravity. Oberleutnant Rolf Herrmachen, an ace with the weight of years of combat experience, couldn't suppress a smirk. He transmitted a message that would become an infamous, forgotten prophecy. The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles. Below them, 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward. 7 tons of pure industrial muscle, their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney double Wasp engines straining. To the Germans, accustomed to the nimble profiles of the Messerschmitt and Spitfire, this machine looked like a terrible joke. They could not have known. None of those confident German pilots could have possibly imagined that they were witnessing the debut of the single weapon that would systematically dismantle the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would be transformed from objects of derision into instruments of aerial terror. The sound of their 8 synchronized .50 caliber Browning machine guns would become the most chilling sound in German skies. The raw mathematics of destruction were already loaded into those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of over 6,000 projectiles per minute. Enough concentrated force to tear a fighter in half in under 2 seconds. The transformation began that April morning, April 8, 1943, when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German wolves positioning for their attack. Blakesley, a veteran of the RAF's Eagle Squadron, understood what his younger pilots did not. Survival in the P-47 required forgetting everything they knew about traditional air combat. This machine was a radical departure. While the Germans pursued lightweight interceptors, Republic Aviation had created an unprecedented high-altitude Juggernaut, a fighter that used mass, power, and overwhelming firepower to redefine the very rules of warfare in the sky. Among the 56 American pilots aloft that day were future legends, aces whose names would soon be whispered with fear. But on that date, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced Air Force in the world. This is the story of how industrial logic defeated tactical brilliance, how the sheer force of American production merged with ingenious design to create a superior quality that overcame the elite skills of the Axis, and how German laughter turned to cold terror. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born out of the panic of June 1940. As German forces swept across France, the U.S. Army Air Force urgently demanded a high-altitude interceptor. Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, delivered something extraordinary. It will be a dinosaur, Kartveli admitted, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. The prototype that first flew in May 1941 was shockingly heavy. At 9,900 pounds empty, it was 65% heavier than its predecessor. It had a massive, complex turbo supercharger system with ducting running all the way through the rear fuselage. Test pilots universally ask the same question: this thing actually flies? Not only did it fly, but it flew like nothing else at extreme altitude. The 2,000 horsepower engine could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters were already gasping for thin air. The supercharger delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, initially despised the aircraft. In training, the P-47 killed more Americans than Germans would in the first months of combat. It was a brutal beast to master. The massive torque on takeoff, the tendency to ground loop on landing, and the alarming discovery of compressibility, where controls froze in a high-speed dive, made it a true challenge. But those who tamed the machine discovered its secret. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma and future top ace, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat missions in the spring of 1943 seemed to confirm every German prejudice. The P-47s could not turn with the Focke-Wulfs, nor could they climb with the Messerschmitts at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed a simple tactic: stay below the heavy Thunderbolts, force them into a turning fight where agility mattered more than weight. Oberstleutnant Joseph Pips Priller, commander of JG-26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter. "The new American fighter is meat for the taking. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow." The early statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In the first month of operations, the American groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German losses. The RAF, watching from their Spitfire bases, quietly suggested the Americans might want to reconsider their choice. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But beneath the surface of the lost statistics, something significant was unfolding that German intelligence failed to grasp. The Thunderbolts that were being shot down were absorbing an unbelievable level of punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have completely disintegrated a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt. The massive radial engine, lacking a vulnerable liquid coolant system, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. The sheer structural integrity of Kartvelli's Dinosaur was paying dividends. More significantly, when the P-47s did manage to align their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The sheer density of the 8-gun battery created a convergence zone of total destruction. Imagine recreación artística del interior de un taller de mantenimiento, donde ingenieros americanos, con overoles, inspeccionan un ala de P-47 llena de agujeros de bala. El enfoque está en el daño y la tenacidad. Tipo, estática. Duración estimada, 10 segundos, unlike the early war rifle caliber weapons or the cannons with limited ammunition. The American fighter could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in the fast, brutal dance of air combat. The moment that truly began to change German perceptions happened on June 26, 1943, high over France. It involved the aforementioned Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron. Johnson's formation was attacked by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s, led by the younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect diving surprise attack. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear, was instantly caught in a crossfire. 21 20-meter cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded by shrapnel, tried to escape, but a cannon shell explosion had welded the canopy track shut. He was trapped in a dying machine at a crippling altitude. What followed defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. With no forward visibility, a violently shaking engine, and controls that barely responded, Johnson somehow managed to level the aircraft and point it toward the English Channel. The P-47 continued to fly, a battered wreck with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then a lone Focke-Wulf 190 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping home. The German pilot, historically unidentified, positioned himself and opened fire. Johnson could only huddle behind his armor plate and wait for the final crushing blow. The Thunderbolt absorbed the Germans' entire cannon ammunition load. Still, it flew. The German pilot, out of cannon ammunition, repositioned and fired again, emptying his machine guns. The Thunderbolt still flew. He pulled alongside the wreck. Johnson could clearly see the young German pilot's face, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion, and then to something approaching fear. The German pilot, having exhausted all his ammunition, shook his head in apparent amazement, offered an informal salute, and peeled away. He left the American wreck to its impossible fate. Johnson landed at Manston. The crew chief stopped counting the bullet holes after reaching 200. The engine had taken direct hits. Control cables were partially severed. Yet, the steel spine of the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's P-47 sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers were astounded by their own creation. German intelligence, receiving the unbelievable combat report, initially refused to believe it. No machine could absorb that much punishment. But the testimony from multiple German pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver and survived the ordeal. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Colonel Zemke, the commander who once hated the aircraft, had found the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially a disadvantage, was now its most powerful weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach the speeds of 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical plunge. This speed could then be converted back to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters hopelessly behind. Captain Walker, Bud Mahurin, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. Instead of engaging in traditional frantic dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to extreme altitude, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting almost impossible for the Germans. At the bottom of those terrifying dives, the heavy American machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived the encounter described it as facing a wall of lead. Aircraft caught in the 8-gun convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. The combined firepower created an impenetrable zone of overwhelming destruction. The true revelation of American firepower came on August 17, 1943, during the deep penetration raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Major David Schilling, leading his squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Me-110, destroyer aircraft, the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers, heavily armed but less maneuverable. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Me-110s who survived, later recounted his terrifying experience. "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven," he recalled. "I saw hits strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart, not shot down, but destroyed. Wings separated from the fuselage. The crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, and Mi-110 became nothing." 8 Mi-110s and Mi-109s were reportedly destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never encountered such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried a total of 3,400 rounds. At the typical 300-yard convergence distance, all 8 gun paths intersected in a zone about 6 feet in diameter. Anything inside that zone faced 100 projectiles per second. The ammunition itself was a marvel of American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, American pilots could maintain fire for over half a minute. Lieutenant Colonel Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe, described the effect plainly. "When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half. The pilot never knew what hit him." By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality. The P-47's performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged Double Wasp maintained its power to 30,000 feet and beyond. German fighters, relying on less efficient mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. This reality proved fatal for one of Germany's most decorated aces, Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, with 206 victories. Leading his squadron against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190 sluggish and unresponsive. His powerful BMW engine was struggling for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s from the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were, essentially, sitting targets. Robert Johnson, now a seasoned combat pilot, spotted Philipp's distinctive aircraft. Johnson's combat report was simple and clinical. Open fire at 300 yards. Observe strikes along the entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their very best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions, could not survive the Thunderbolts, what chance did the average pilot have? The German High Command ordered an immediate investigation. The report delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943 was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its rugged armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate and armored deflection plates. Most disturbingly, its construction allowed it to absorb damage that would have destroyed 3 conventional fighters and still return home. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England, completing the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a massive hydromatic propeller with broad paddle blades over 13 feet in diameter. The improvement in climb rate was instant and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts were anemic, the new variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most operational altitudes. The massive propeller did more than just improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt, the tips of the paddle blades reaching supersonic speeds, created a deep, unique, thundering roar that could be heard for miles. German ground troops quickly learned to identify the approaching aircraft by this sound alone. A deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, the Thunderclap. Oberstleutnant Heinz Knoke, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variant in February 1944. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced to formation, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." By March 1944, equipped with external fuel tanks, P-47s could now escort bombers deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe was forced to fly through the P-47 screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. German pilots developed a grudging respect that bordered on cold fear. Major Günther Rau, one of Germany's top aces, survived an encounter on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He later recalled, "We saw them above us. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant loss of life." As P-51 Mustangs arrived to handle the extremely long-range escort duties in 1944, P-47 units shifted focus, increasingly specializing in ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the entire German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944 as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved devastatingly effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles. A mere 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that truly transformed the P-47 into a multi-role monster. Later variants could carry a bomb load equal to that of an early war medium bomber, plus 10 high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVIRs, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer Grenadier regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced the P-47 ground attacks firsthand. "They came in low," he said. "So low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass." The psychological effect on the men was devastating. We called them Jabo, fighter bombers, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of air power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the landing beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were met with crushing opposition. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of JG-2, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported that the sky belonged completely to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically strangled German movement in daylight. The statistics are staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives and 3,147 trucks destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond effectively to the relentless Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, but nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. While devastating Europe, the Thunderbolt was simultaneously proving its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the P-47's durability was perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the campaign. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away." Their return fire was terrifying. Streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart. The P-47N, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured massive increases in fuel capacity, extending its range to over 2,350 miles. The short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon capable of escorting B-29s to Japan's doorstep. Perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47's design came in its encounters with the terrifying German jet fighters, the Messerschmitt Me 262. With a top speed of over 440 miles per hour, the jet should have been untouchable by propeller-driven aircraft. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch the jets in two critical situations: during takeoff and landing, when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 km/h, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed, never saw the diving fighter until the guns opened up. Meyer's report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 850 caliber guns proved far more effective than anticipated against jet aircraft." By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed to specifically counter the jets. With water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower, these ultimate Thunderbolts were capable of 470 mpn level flight, fast enough to intercept the jets under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding a P-47 squadron, shot down two Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. "The jets are faster, but they can't turn, and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery, and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them." The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might in the final chapter of the P-47's dominance came during the final phases of the air campaign. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the clumsy, overweight, flying milk bottle that brought laughter to the faces of German aces in 1943, had evolved into the hammer of the Western Allies. It proved that brutal, reliable mass, combined with overwhelming, concentrated firepower, was the most effective formula for total victory in the merciless skies of global conflict. It was a fighter that could not be killed, and its guns were the sound of an empire's crushing defeat.